June 10th, 1944, Normandy, France. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. The dirt roads had turned into thick rivers of mud, and the sound of engines groaning in the distance mixed with the thunder. Inside a captured farmhouse near St. Lo, a group of German Panzer crewmen huddled around a field map, cigarette smoke coiling through the damp air. Their commander, Leutnant Erich Bauer, leaned against a window frame, binoculars around his neck. His Panther tank, sleek, angular, the pride of the Reich, stood parked outside, its 75mm gun still wet from the night's patrol. He smirked as he heard one of his gunners laugh. "Another one burned today," the gunner said. "A Sherman. They go up like matchboxes." The others joined in, chuckling, almost pitying their enemy. The American M4 Sherman was a running joke among German crews. Its armor was too thin, its gun too small, its silhouette too tall. They called it Die Brennen Zigarenkiste, the burning cigar box. Bauer had seen it himself. A single Panther could knock out half a dozen Shermans before they even got close. In training, he used to joke that it was unfair, like hunting rabbits with a rifle. But outside, in the gray fields beyond the farmhouse, something strange was happening. The horizon was moving. Through his binoculars, Bauer saw shapes, distant, green, and endless. Tanks, dozens of them, crawling forward through the mist, tracks grinding, engines howling. He frowned. "That can't be right," he muttered. "They can't have that many." By the end of the day, the laughter stopped. On the first week after D-Day, the German army expected the American assault to stall. They believed the Allies couldn't sustain such an invasion. The logistics alone, men, fuel, ammunition, tanks, seemed impossible. But the impossible had arrived. As German panzers stalked through the hedgerows, Sherman tanks just kept coming. Destroy one, and another rolled in behind it, hit a column, and by the next on, it was rebuilt, rearmed, and advancing again. It didn't make sense. The Wehrmacht was used to being the unstoppable one, the machine that rolled over nations in days. But now, in Normandy, the hunters were the ones outnumbered. A Panther could kill a Sherman in a single shot, but for every Sherman destroyed, 5 more appeared. A German tank ace named Michael Wittmann, one of the most feared panzer commanders of the war, later admitted that the numbers stunned even him. "We knocked out dozens," he said, "but they replaced them faster than we could load our guns." It wasn't just numbers. It was rhythm. The Americans moved like a machine. Shermans came by ship, by rail, by convoy. The men who drove them were young, inexperienced, but there were always more. And behind every tank was a factory. Behind every factory, an army of workers. In Germany, it took weeks to replace a single Panther. In America, they built a Sherman every 25 minutes. 25 minutes. No German crew could comprehend that. By nightfall, Bauer's unit had knocked out 7 Shermans. The fields were littered with wrecks, burning hulks glowing like torches in the rain. He thought they'd earned rest. But then, from the darkness, the rumble began again. More engines, more tanks. Through the smoke, the silhouettes reappeared. The same formation, the same numbers, the same green monsters that should have been gone. His radio operator looked at him, pale. "Are they the same ones?" Bauer didn't answer. He didn't know it yet. But he wasn't just fighting tanks. He was fighting an idea, one born in Detroit, forged in steel, and fueled by the greatest industrial surge the world had ever seen. And no matter how many they destroyed, it wouldn't stop. Because this war wasn't going to be won by the best machine. It would be won by the machine that never stopped coming. And by the time the Germans realized that, it was already too late. June 27th, 1944, near St. Lo, Normandy. The battlefield stank of wet earth, gasoline, and burnt metal. Charred tank husks dotted the hedgerows like tombstones. In one field, the twisted wreck of an American Sherman still smoldered, its tracks half melted into the mud. German Panzer commander Leutnant Erich Bauer climbed onto his Panther's turret and scanned the horizon. His men were exhausted, faces gray with smoke, uniforms streaked with mud and oil. They had been fighting almost without pause for 3 days. The Panther's radio crackled. Enemy armor sighted. Northeast ridge. Bauer lifted his binoculars, his jaw tightening. There they were again. A whole column of Shermans, moving in perfect formation down the hedgerow lane, their white stars barely visible onto the dust. "How many this time?" his gunner muttered. "Too many," Bauer said. He gave the order. The Panther's main gun roared, its 75mm shell tearing through the first Sherman. Flames burst from the turret. A clean kill. The next shot hit another, flipping it sideways. But for every one that burned, 2 more emerged from the smoke. The Shermans didn't retreat. They didn't hesitate. They just kept coming. Across the front, German commanders were witnessing the same thing. An enemy that didn't seem to run out of anything. Not tanks, not men, not ammunition. For every German Panzer that reached the front line, the Allies could land 10 Shermans. The Germans still had the better machine. Faster, thicker, deadlier. But they were running out of fuel, out of spare parts, out of time. The Americans weren't just fighting with tanks. They were fighting with production lines. From Detroit to Chicago, thousands of factory workers, men, women, immigrants, worked around the clock to feed the war. Assembly lines that once built Buicks and Fords were now cranking out tanks by the thousands. At Chrysler's Detroit arsenal, the line ran 24 hours a day. Sparks flew, steel rang, engines growled to life, a symphony of industry. Each tank rolled out painted olive green, crewed by men who had learned to drive them just weeks earlier. To the Germans, it felt impossible. To the Americans, it was just another shift. Bauer's Panther knocked out 4 more Shermans before the 5th finally hit back. A shell glanced off the turret, throwing hot metal into the cabin. The gunner screamed, clutching his face. "Get him out," Bauer yelled. The loader dragged the man through the hatch, blood streaking his sleeve. Bauer could feel the Panther shaking. Another impact, another hit. Reverse. Reverse. The driver gunned the engine, backing into the trees. Dirt and debris flew. Smoke filled the cabin, thick and suffocating. And through that haze, Bauer saw it again, the endless wave. Shermans crawling forward, guns raised, commanders standing half out of their hatches, calm, methodical. He grabbed the radio. "HQ, we need reinforcements. There are too many. They don't stop." The voice on the other end came cold, tired. "There are no reinforcements." Static swallowed the rest. By nightfall, the Panther limped back behind the German lines. Mechanics swarmed over it, welding fresh armor, patching holes. Bauer sat beside the tank, staring at the fire-lit horizon. In the distance, he could hear the constant drone of Allied engines, the sound of the war machine advancing. His adjutant approached. "We destroyed 12 today." Bauer didn't look up. "And how many came back?" The man hesitated. "All of them, I think." That was when Bauer understood. The Allies weren't just winning battles. They were manufacturing victory. He thought of the factories back home, bombed, crumbling, starving for steel and fuel. Germany had built the finest tanks in the world, but America had built a system that could build anything. And now, the battlefield was proving which one mattered more. The next morning, Bauer climbed back into his Panther. His hands were shaking as he adjusted his headset. He looked over the countryside, fields once green, now torn and smoking, dotted with blackened hulks. It was no longer a war of skill. It was endurance. And for the first time, Bauer realized something terrifying. The enemy's greatest weapon wasn't the Sherman. It was the fact that it never ran out. And soon, neither would the men driving them. But just how far could Germany's elite tank crews go before that realization broke them completely? July 1944, near St. Lo, Normandy. The morning mist hung low over the hedgerows, heavy with the smell of diesel and burnt oil. The quiet before dawn was broken only by the faint whine of distant aircraft, the sound every German soldier now feared. Lieutenant Erich Bauer rubbed the grime from his eyes. He hadn't slept properly in days. His Panther had been repaired again, fresh weld lines tracing the scars from its last battle. The tank still reeked of smoke and blood. Outside, his crew moved like ghosts, silent, efficient, hollow-eyed. They were the best Germany had left, and even they were starting to break. As Bauer climbed into the turret, his radio crackled to life with orders from command. Hold position. Enemy armor advancing from the west. He cursed under his breath. Of course they are, he muttered. He peered through the periscope and froze. Over the ridge, the fields were alive with motion. Dozens of Shermans, rolling forward in perfect synchronization. The early sun glinted off their tracks, the air vibrating with the thunder of their engines. It wasn't a charge. It was an advance, mechanical, relentless, inevitable. He'd seen this before, too many times. But today, something felt different. The formation was wider, the sound heavier. This wasn't a skirmish. It was an occupation. The first shell came from the left, a deafening crack that split the air and slammed into a nearby German tank. The explosion turned the vehicle into a fireball. Shrapnel rained down, clattering against Bauer's Panther. "Fire!" he shouted. His gunner zeroed in on a Sherman crawling through the hedgerow. The 75mm round struck dead center. The American tank erupted in flames. A clean kill. Next target, 3 o'clock. Another shot. Another hit. The crew exhaled, almost relieved. But then they saw it. 2 more Shermans breaking through the smoke side by side. And behind them, even more. 10, 20, maybe more. They weren't charging to die. They were absorbing the losses and moving forward like nothing had happened. Bauer slammed his fist against the hatch. It's madness. They don't stop. They don't. Before he could finish, another shell tore into the earth beside them, flipping a nearby half-track like paper. "Pull back," he ordered. "Now." The Panther lurched backward, grinding through the mud, branches snapping under its tracks. Behind them, the German line was collapsing. Machine gun fire echoed from every direction. Smoke swallowed the sky. Through it all, Bauer heard one sound, the rhythmic rumble of hundreds of engines moving as one. By midday, the field was lost. Bauer's Panther retreated to a new position along the ridge. He stood outside the tank, watching the horizon through binoculars. His uniform was caked with mud, his face streaked with soot. What he saw didn't look like war anymore. It looked like production. Shermans moved in waves, freshly painted, freshly fueled, each with a crew that looked barely old enough to shave. And when one was hit, recovery vehicles appeared almost instantly, hauling it away to be repaired. The Germans didn't have that luxury. Every lost tank was a permanent scar. Every dead crewman, a void that couldn't be filled. He turned to his adjutant, who stared blankly at the endless convoy. "They're not fighting like us," Bauer said quietly. "They're building their way across France." That night, Bauer sat beside a dying campfire, his men eating cold rations in silence. The air hummed with distant artillery, American guns, steady and unbroken. He thought about the rumors, about how American workers back home were being paid overtime to build tanks while their children collected scrap metal for parts. He thought of the factories, the conveyor belts, the endless steel, and for the first time, he felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Not anger, not even fear, helplessness, because he finally understood. No matter how skilled his crew was, no matter how perfect the German tanks were, the Americans had turned war into something else entirely. A process, an industry, a machine that produced victory faster than anyone could destroy it. The next morning, Bauer watched as a column of Shermans advanced again, rolling through what had once been a German stronghold. He turned to his gunner and whispered, "We're not fighting soldiers anymore." The man frowned. "Then what are we fighting?" Bauer stared into the smoke-filled horizon. A country that forgot how to lose. But the full weight of that realization, the moment Germany truly saw what it was up against, would come a few weeks later, when they discovered where all those tanks were coming from. August 1944, the port of Cherbourg, France. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, the kind of dull metallic light that made the entire landscape look like it was made of steel. Rows upon rows of American supply ships crowded the harbor, cranes swinging in rhythm, unloading cargo faster than the Germans could even count. Fuel drums, ammunition crates, jeeps, rations, and tanks. Endless tanks. Standing on the cliffs above the port, Leutnant Erich Bauer stared through his binoculars, stunned. He'd seen Allied supply lines before, but never like this. From his position, the docks looked alive. Convoys of Shermans rolled down the ramps like clockwork, one after another, the noise of engines blending into a single mechanical roar. Dockworkers, soldiers, sailors, civilians, moved in seamless coordination, shouting orders, guiding cranes, driving forklifts. It wasn't an army. It was a production line that had crawled right onto the French coast. Beside him, his sergeant spat into the dirt. "They build them faster than we can burn them." Bauer didn't answer. He just lowered his binoculars and muttered, "Now I understand." Months earlier, back in Germany, Bauer had believed in the myth of technical supremacy, that German precision, craftsmanship, and discipline would always outweigh brute mass. The Panther was proof of it, an engineering masterpiece, superior to any Allied tank in design, firepower, and armor. But watching the Shermans roll ashore by the hundreds, Bauer realized something chilling. The Americans hadn't tried to outdesign the Germans. They'd outproduced them. Behind every Sherman tank was not just a crew, but a continent. In Detroit, the Chrysler tank arsenal operated around the clock, spitting out a new Sherman every 25 minutes. Assembly lines once used for sedans and farm tractors were now feeding the war effort. In California, women riveters welded armor plates while jazz crackled from factory radios. In Chicago, machine shops hammered out treads and gun barrels by the thousands. Every bolt, every gear, every gallon of gasoline had a place to go, because America had turned chaos into coordination. Even the damaged Shermans that Bauer's men destroyed didn't stay gone for long. Within days, they were back on the field, repaired, refitted, repainted. The Germans joked about it bitterly. The Americans don't have tanks, they have ghosts. Behind Bauer, the remnants of his division prepared a last defense. They dug in along the riverbank, setting up anti-tank guns, mortars, and what little ammunition they had left. As dawn broke, the Shermans opened fire from across the water. The ground shook. The German guns responded. A few shells, a few desperate flashes. Bauer's Panther fired one perfect shot, striking a Sherman mid-river and setting it ablaze. The men cheered. But then came another Sherman, and another, and another. Soon, the entire bridge was filled with tanks crawling forward through the smoke. A steel procession, unbroken, unhurried. One by one, the German guns fell silent. Hours later, when the bridge finally collapsed under the strain, the Allies had already built another one, a floating pontoon bridge a few miles upriver, thrown together overnight by combat engineers. Bauer heard the report over his battered radio. He laughed once, a hollow, defeated sound. "Of course they did," he said. "Of course they did." The Germans had spent years perfecting weapons like the Tiger and Panther, machines built for precision, built for victory on paper. But now, the battlefield didn't care about perfection. It cared about persistence. And the Americans had turned persistence into an art form. By April, Bauer's unit was down to one working tank. He received orders to fall back toward Cologne, but his fuel gauge barely registered a quarter full. He knew what that meant. When the fuel ran out, the war would end for him, whether he wanted it to or not. He sat on the turret at dusk, watching as the Shermans rolled down the valley below, dust trailing in the orange light. Some of them bore names painted on their sides: Lucky Lady, Hell on Wheels, Liberty Bell. They looked almost cheerful, like the men inside them believed they were driving home, not in a battle. And maybe they were, because for the Americans, the war was already a victory. For the Germans, it was a slow realization that had started on the beaches of Normandy and was now ending in their own backyards. As darkness fell, Bauer's radio picked up an English broadcast, the BBC. The voice was calm, steady, certain. "The Allied armies have crossed the Rhine. Germany's defeat is inevitable." He switched it off and looked east, toward the ruins of his homeland. He whispered to himself, "We built weapons. They built a world." He knew the war was over, but he also knew the truth, one that history would remember long after the guns fell silent. You can destroy tanks. You can kill men. But you can't stop a nation that can replace both faster than you can count the wreckage. And that was how the Germans who once laughed at the Sherman ended up fearing it. Because it wasn't just a tank. It was the sound of inevitability. Yendi,